It was February 1945. Hearts beating, missiles spiraling overhead, the Marines trudged forward on the small island of Iwo Jima, fear controlling their every thought. It had been 4 days since the battle had begun, and the soldiers trekked through the black volcanic ash as they started their hike to the top of Mount Suribachi, hoping that this could be the end of one of the bloodiest battles in history. Japanese soldiers hiding behind every corner, paranoia filled the Marines' heads as they pictured the thousands of lives already taken. But little did Japan know, the Marines had a secret asset: the brave men in the shadows that allowed the Marines to stay one step ahead of their enemies by sending over 800 messages without a single error. 5th Marine Division Signal Officer Major Howard Connor proudly recalled, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would have never taken Iwo Jima." Even though, in 1924, Native Americans born in the United States were legally given the rights that other U.S. citizens were born into, they were neither welcomed nor fully accepted in the country. In some areas, their rights were completely ignored, leaving Native Americans still unable to vote. When the United States entered World War II, they needed an unbreakable code to communicate important information without the enemy deciphering their messages. The Navajo language was the perfect tool since it was passed on orally and not written. The Navajo code talkers proved crucial to the war effort and inspired other Native American tribes to speak up for their interests and concerns. Because of the Navajo contributions in World War II, they amplified the voices of Native Americans, leading to several movements in the late 1960s that fought for the rights of their people.
The Navajo tribe is believed to have migrated to the southwestern part of the United States from Canada as early as the year 1300, but they didn't settle and fully become an independent tribe until the 1700s, where they located in the southwest, specifically Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico. But throughout the years, the Navajo were treated more like a burden, rather than members of the United States. In 1879, the first government-run boarding school for Native American children opened, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. Here, the motto was "Kill the Indian, save the man," a philosophy many boarding schools adopted, hoping that if they removed the Native children from their reservations, they would be forced to take part in the white values and culture. The Navajo felt like an outcast in their own country. It wasn't until 1924 that Native Americans born in America were given the rights or the titles that other U.S. citizens were born into. But still, the Navajo continued to be the minority. Even though the Native Americans in the United States were treated poorly by the government, they still jumped at the opportunity to serve their country. In World War I, the Choctaw pioneered the use of Native languages for ciphers and paved the way for other Native tribes, like the Navajo, to be involved in battle with their country. On September 1st, 1939, World War II began. But it wasn't until December 7th, 1941, that America was forced to enter the war.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Soon after joining the war, the United States realized they needed an unbreakable code. Philip Johnston believed that the Navajo were the perfect candidates. He was the son of a missionary and had grown up on a Navajo reservation immersed in the Navajo culture. The Navajo were one of the few tribes left that didn't have German students infiltrate their tribe after World War I trying to learn their language, which meant there was no way the Germans would know the code. Johnson proposed to Signal Corps Communications Officer Lieutenant Colonel James E. Jones that they use the Navajo language as the basis for their code. After viewing a demonstration of the code talker's ability, the Marine Corps were so impressed they recruited the first 29 Navajos in only 2 weeks to begin creating the code. Between 1941 and 1942, more than 400 Navajos were recruited. They were all sent to Camp Elliott in California to train and develop the code for combat. The code was derived by taking the message and spelling each word out. This meant that each English letter in the alphabet was assigned a Navajo word to correspond with the letter. For example, A was ant, or Navajo, wolachi. Because the Navajo had to not only memorize the language, but be able to go back and forth from Navajo to English, they used things that were familiar to them to derive the code. Fighter planes became hummingbirds, submarines turned into ironfish, and Hitler roughly translated to crazy white man, or mustache smeller. Although the language was based on the Navajo dialect, by the end of developing their code, a Navajo who also spoke the language would not be able to understand the message. The Japanese captured a Navajo who wasn't a code talker. He was forced to listen to the transmissions by his captors, but they sounded like gibberish to him.
Although the process and job assignments were stressful, the code talkers worked beautifully in battle. They were responsible for not only protecting themselves, but also relaying and sending messages in code through their radios. They were told to protect the code with everything they had, even if that meant their life. The job was also highly dangerous. The Navajo had to always remain moving when transmitting and receiving codes because the Germans would target the radio men. During battle, one code talker would operate the portable radio while the other would receive and translate the message from Navajo to English. The Navajo code talkers were a pivotal part of the battles fought, including the D-Day invasion in France and the Battle of Iwo Jima. It was a strenuous fight that was fought against the Japanese in a 5-week-long battle. It was classified as one of the bloodiest battles of World War II due to the fact that the Japanese lost 200 soldiers and the Marines lost over 7,000. Because of the tough terrain of the island, the Marines never knew exactly where their enemies were, and more codes needed to be sent. The Navajo were a pivotal part to the victory that occurred on the small island of Iwo Jima. The code was never broken and was kept a secret for many years afterwards because the government was hoping it could be used again to win another war, but it never was. Due to the fact it was kept a secret, the Navajo code talkers didn't get the proper recognition that they deserved for a long time.
During my military career, I had the honor to hear veteran code talkers speak about their heroic exploits in World War II. They were real heroes who inspired us all.
As the war concluded, the Allies' success resulted in celebration all around the world. The soldiers were welcomed home as heroes, but the code talkers returned home without any national recognition from their country. They remained proud to have served, but felt that they should have gotten more. They weren't allowed to elaborate on their roles during the war to even their families. In years to follow, the American Indian movement formed and protested Native American civil rights, which mostly allowed protection for Native Americans. The Navajo helped influence this movement and formed change after showing their dedication to the country and still not being treated right. In 2001, the Navajo code talkers finally received the recognition they deserved. Out of the 29 original code talkers, only 13 were still living at the time. They were honored with gold congressional medals by President George W. Bush. The other Navajo involved received silver congressional medals. These awards were essential to the celebration of the code talkers, one which should have been celebrated long ago. With the country's interest growing, President Ronald Reagan designated August 14th for the National Code Talkers, serving as a day to remember all the Native Americans who fought for our country in both world wars. Even though these monumental steps towards Native American acceptance were crucial, thousands of men died without knowing the country's appreciation for them.